Not only did the Washington Commanders get an up-and-coming coach in Daronte Jones, according to Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, they got the next man in line in Minnesota.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network. And I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9. You can also find me writing for Commanders on SI. And of course, I'm here with you at least 5 days every single week. Coming up on this bonus episode, Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings is here to tell us if Eric Wilson is just another old guy or a dog worth adding to the pack. But first, the context of who Daronte Jones was in Minnesota before Washington scooped him up. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Daronte Jones is a guy who entered the fray late in the Washington Commanders defense coordinator search. I think if I'm not mistaken, he was the last person they actually interviewed, but he ended up being the person that they hired. Did not wait for Carl Scott to potentially win the Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks here in just over a week. Didn't get Brian Flores, who opted to return to the Minnesota Vikings to be their defensive coordinator. Did not offer, as far as I know, Jonathan Gannon or Patrick Graham the job. And both of those guys have now taken other jobs with other teams as their defensive coordinator. So the defensive coordinator search is over. It's not a experienced NFL play caller, but it is an experienced coach. Daronte Jones, absolutely experienced. And Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings has been covering the Minnesota Vikings throughout Daronte's tenure there as a coach on the defensive staff for the Minnesota Vikings, and since before Brian Flores arrived as the defensive coordinator. So I reached out to Luke. I thought he'd be a really good resource to kind of tell us where Daronte Jones is coming from. And Luke says that we're not just getting a coach in Washington. We're getting a specific philosophy that comes from the Minnesota Vikings, who he says have been grooming him to take this exact role in their franchise when the day comes that Brian Flores leaves. So let's hear from Luke about Daronte Jones.
This is not about Daronte Jones as the D-backs coach having this great group of D-backs. The Vikings have neglected that position in free agency, and a lot of the draft picks that they've had in the last few years haven't panned out at all. Rather, this is about having the Brian Flores defense. I imagine that's what the Commanders are looking for here. So if you want to know about Daronte Jones, you have to know about the Brian Flores defense, how it blitzes, how it matches zone coverage with those blitzes, and you're probably hoping you can do something like that. The question is, would Daronte Jones be as blitz heavy as Brian Flores? He's the #1 by a mile blitz percentage defensive coordinator in the league. So would Daronte Jones do the same thing? It's a question we all had when we were sitting here wondering if he was going to be our defensive coordinator because Flores got a head coaching job. Looks like this isn't the cycle for that, so now Daronte Jones becomes the guy, hey, we want the Flores defense, but we can't get Flores himself. He's the next guy in line. The Vikings have been grooming him to be the next guy in line. So that part, he at least has some intention there, but the question is going to be, as somebody who doesn't have play calling experience, will he be able to pilot this thing the way that Brian Flores does, or is it going to be like Vic Fangio, where he can run his defense, but a lot of disciples have gone to a lot of different places in the league and totally flamed out? That will be the question about Daronte Jones.
All right, so that's Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings on Daronte Jones, and yeah, something that we've discussed pretty extensively here on Locked On Commanders is the style of defense that Daronte Jones is coming from, specifically in Minnesota, that blitz heavy, incredibly aggressive, but also versatile and also different in some very key ways, right? In 2025, they did it with a 5-man front. In 2024, they did it with a little bit more zone coverage. In 2023, it was heavy man coverage. Like, they've done things differently, but that style of aggression has always been the trademark and has consistently transferred from each style of play. So I think that is something that you can hopefully look to expect from this year's Washington Commanders defense, and from, interacting with some of you, especially the insiders and things like that. Even if the defense for some reason doesn't get a lot better, which of course, fingers crossed that it does, but even if it doesn't, would rather see them be a middling defense or not a non-effective defense fighting versus being passive and just kind of laying down for teams, which is what we kind of felt like we were watching in 2025. And then even at moments in 2024, despite the success of that year. Of course, there are some concerns, like there are with every tree of an assistant coach coming from a successful tree. whether it be Belichick or whatever flaming out, and not every branch off of a tree is going to be successful. But the fact that the Minnesota Vikings saw enough in Daronte to begin grooming him and have been grooming him now for years to eventually replace Brian Flores as their defense coordinator, I think that's a nice boost in confidence for me. That gives me a little bit more confidence, I should say, that Daronte could potentially be successful here in Washington this year, assuming he gets the right players to fit his scheme or fit what he's trying to do, or can at least orchestrate a scheme that fits the players that he ends up having, which is where the partnership between he and Adam Peters come in, which is also where some of the free agent targets that we've talked about have come in, potentially the most polarizing being linebacker Eric Wilson. So I thought we would ask Luke, while we had his attention, just what to expect from Eric Wilson if the Washington Commanders do pursue him as a player. So that coming up next on today's bonus episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This bonus episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And this week, Prize Picks has a special max discount for the big game. Live in the app right now, Drake May just needs one passing yard for the max discount to win. Add another player to your lineup, and if that pick hits, you get to cash in. Prize Picks is super simple to use, and it takes no time to get started at all. The whole format is incredibly clean. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and it makes watching games even more fun because every drive and every stat really matters. The social feeds feature is awesome. You can share your lineups and even copy lineups from previous winners with one click. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup with Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Today's bonus episode of Locked On Commanders also brought to you in part by Drip Drop. Kicking off the year feels good if you have the goals to get it done right. And honestly, hydration is the easiest way to win. When I stay on top of it, my energy, my focus, my mood, they all level up just not. But let's be real, plain water just doesn't always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or you're just trying to stay consistent with your health goals. Well, that's where Drip Drop comes in. It's doctor-developed, proven, fast hydration that helps your body and your mind work better. Think clearer focus, better energy, elevated mood, even a fresh glow for your skin. I've been using Drip Drop here. They sent us a nice little care package, and today we've got Drip Drop Orange in my water bottle sitting here next to me as I get the day going on this Sunday, preparing for our next episode, our first mock draft Monday of the year. They very much enjoy their product, very much enjoy the flavors. And right now, Drip Drop is offering our listeners 20% off your first order. So go to dripdrop.com, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL. And this episode is brought to you in part by Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment, but getting tickets can be a little bit rough. And that part hasn't always been so simple. And that's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast. Without the hassle, it puts the advantage back to where it belongs, the fans. Pull up the Game Time app, pick your upcoming NBA game in your area, and you can have tickets locked in within minutes. You're going to love seeing the all-in price up front with no surprise fees at checkout, and being able to see the view from your seats before you buy makes the decision even easier. You also have zone deals, which are really creative and interesting. You just choose the section. Game Time will pick the seats, and you're going to save even more because of it. You get great last-minute options, too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices, and a lot of prices dropping the closer it gets to tip-off. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today, and remember, it's gametime.co, not gametime.com. Pending free agent linebacker Eric Wilson of the Minnesota Vikings has been a little bit of a lightning rod, a little bit of a sore subject for some folks. I understand some people don't want to even consider Eric Wilson as a free agent option. Not that you or I really had that decision anyway, because he is over the age of 30. However, the desire to get younger, quote unquote, as a overall roster does not necessarily require every player added to this roster being under the age of 30. And in fact, if Bobby Wagner decides to hang it up and retire from the NFL, and they bring in Eric Wilson, not as a one-for-one replacement because they're not the same player by any means, but just as like a veteran replacement in the linebacker room, they would actually still be getting younger. But most of the pushback I'm hearing or seeing on the idea even of considering Eric Wilson is all age related. I'm not seeing a lot of scheme comments. I'm not seeing a lot of performance comments. I'm seeing a lot of age comments, and seeing some comments about he's been a lifelong backup and all these things. And like we said on the last episode, we're not asking him to come in here and be the Superman of the defense and being the gem of the defense. We're asking him to come in here and be a translator for Daronte Jones and being a contributor where he can be used. Nobody's talking about him being the star of the program, but just being a feature part of installing the program for Coach Daronte Jones. So since so many want to talk about why they don't want Eric Wilson because of his age, I figured we'd bring Luke in to give the player perspective. Who is Eric Wilson as a player on the field in the defense where he's going to actually matter versus his the age on his ID card? And Luke starts off by asking us not to take him.
So now you want Eric Wilson. You got to get away, man. Eric Wilson is a dog, and I do not want him to leave. You already got Daronte Jones. You're greedy. Okay, no, in all seriousness, here's the Eric Wilson scoop. So he's been like a backup linebacker for his whole career. Now he's on the wrong side of 30, and he is and he had this like renaissance with the Vikings defense. And part of that was the way Flores used him as this versatile chess piece. So the Eric Wilson's strategy was, there was a lot of blitzing. He was just a good blitzer as a normal linebacker blitzer. Blitz from depth, walk up to the line of scrimmage, beat running backs in pass pro. He did a phenomenal job at that. He led the league in pressures among linebackers, among off-ball linebackers. But they also used him as a genuine edge rusher sometimes. So I got in a lot of debates over the course of the season because I didn't think that was right for him. They would literally have him line up at 5 technique and take on an offensive tackle, and he would get rocked a lot. He's a linebacker. He's not like a big burly, set the edge kind of guy. So I don't think you want him to do that. But the Vikings kind of backed off of that and then just started using him as an overhang player. So they would have a normal edge rusher, like Andrew Van Ginkel, for example, at outside the tackle, just playing, 5 technique edge rusher. And then Eric Wilson would line up outside Van Ginkel and blitz from there. And that was another tool that did a really good job of disrupting a lot of the stuff that teams were trying to use to attack this defense. So he became a bit of a Swiss Army knife player and a really, really productive one, which is actually like a really valuable thing. And because he's a little older, and because he's a bit of a one-year wonder, he probably won't be that expensive. So if he does hit free agency, I think there are a lot of teams, especially teams with these Belichick-style defenses that want to use versatility, are going to want to get in on that. I hope the Vikings don't let him exit the building. I really do.
All right. Once again, big thank you to Luke Braun, Locked On Vikings, for coming through. And I don't know what to tell you guys, other than when the guy who covers the team that the player is currently on is literally on the video saying, please don't take this man because we love him and we want him back and we want him to be a feature part of this defense, and et cetera, et cetera. A defense that was head and shoulders above the defense that we're covering here and we're talking about here in Washington. That's a pretty good sign that he's a guy who's probably worth adding to your program, even if it is only for a year or two, even if it is only to help mentor the younger guys. And again, like Luke said, like we've already talked about, lifelong backup, right? He's a guy who's been a role player his entire career, and he's okay with that. He embraces that type of a role. Why wouldn't you want a guy like that on the team, other than, of course, his age? But what I really thought was interesting, because we've already hit the topic of he understands Daronte Jones' scheme, he understands the language, and he can help accelerate the install. But also Luke's part of something that we've talked about, at least on the surface level, but not as in depth as Luke just got, is the fact that Eric Wilson didn't come in as the Mike linebacker. He came in playing one of the different linebacker roles and took over the Mike linebacker duties only when their starting Mike linebacker ended up getting injured. And then, of course, once he came back, they went back to using Eric Wilson in his previous role. That is that overhang role. And it sounds a lot like what the Washington Commanders and what Daronte Jones is possibly, or likely even, going to ask Frankie Luvu to possibly do in a Daronte Jones system. So Eric Wilson not only then becomes, if that's the case, a translator for Daronte Jones, an immediate install assistant coach type of person for Daronte Jones to help this defense get on the same page faster, but he also becomes a direct mentor to Frankie Luvu, who would be the starter in this scenario, to play that overhang linebacker, weak side, Sam, whatever you want to call it, linebacker, depending on what side of the field he is, because we know Frankie's going to be on all sides of the field. Linebacker, and help him potentially have even more success. Now, Frankie is getting up to the age of 30 himself as well, but if Eric Wilson can come in and not only help get the install of the defense done right, but also help Frankie maybe accelerate his process as becoming that overhang linebacker for Daronte Jones' defense. And then, of course, if there is a situation where they need Eric to play, he's proven to be able to be effective as a player on the field as well. Again, if you're looking past just the age of 32, which is what Eric Wilson will be in this season, there's really not a lot of reasons to not think that Eric Wilson wouldn't be a valuable part of the Washington Commanders defense, specifically because Minnesota Vikings are hoping that he doesn't even hit the open market, which of course has to happen first. So we appreciate Luke for coming through. It's the last ditch effort for me in this bonus episode. I thought we'd take a little bit of time to speak to get through to some people who are being a little bit hard-headed on the ID card thing. But that's going to do it for this bonus episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, our first mock draft Monday of the off season. We're going to talk about what a mock draft is supposed to be and some of my favorites from around the league. And then, of course, we'll jump into all of my mock drafts as we get further into the off season. So make sure you are subscribed. Follow along Locked On Commanders so you get all the latest episodes. And you can follow me on X at DHarrison82 or on Instagram at DHarrison_82. And if you never miss an episode, then the Everydayer Club is built for you. LockedOnCommanders.supercast.com to check out the Everydayer Club today. Locked On NFL should be your next listen twice a day, Monday through Friday. You're getting the bird's eye view of the entire league as a whole. And to the Everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every single day. To everybody, I appreciate you for coming through as well. And until next time, we'll stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.